Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Yin Kavat. While Beijing warns against the NATO-ization of Asia, reports suggest China has a number of secret military partnerships and bases underway across the Middle East and Africa. With me to discuss this are Tony Hu, former US Department of Defense Senior Director for China, Taiwan and Mongolia, Guermantes Lailari, retired US Air Force Foreign Area Officer specializing in counterterrorism, irregular warfare and missile defense, and Wen-Ti Sung, Atlantic Council Non-Resident Fellow. Tony, Guermantes and Wen-Ti, very warm welcome to the show today. But first, let's take a look at Beijing's more public military partnerships and agreements. In March this year, Chinese leader Xi Jinping visited his counterpart Vladimir Putin in Moscow. It was more than a year since their meeting in Beijing for the Winter Olympics in 2022, when both leaders declared their no-limits partnership ahead of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In March, despite Xi saying the two nations were driving changes not seen in 100 years, he did not upgrade their no-limits partnership to a formal treaty. Let's come to Guermantes first. Let's compare this no-limits partnership between China and Russia to the one that China has, which is a formal treaty with North Korea.
Right. So the most important part of the treaty between China and North Korea is Article 2, which states that basically the contracting parties undertake jointly to adopt all measures to prevent aggression against either of the contracting parties by any state. Basically, if anybody attacks one another, the other one will help them out.
So it's a mutual defense treaty.
Exactly. It's similar to what NATO treaty would be or any other defense treaty.
Okay. And how about the Russian treaty? Obviously, it's not a treaty.
No, it's not. And I think one of the things I think is important to understand is, as you mentioned, this is the public face of relationships between countries. And there are secret relationships between countries. So we don't really know underneath the best friends forever agreement that Putin and Xi Jinping had signed in February last year. What are the secret parts of that agreement? We keep on hearing whispers of weapons transfers via North Korea or other avenues. So there might be other aspects, but the public face, there is no mutual defense treaty written in the public sphere.
Tony, let's dig a bit deeper on the North Korean treaty. So G-Man has said that it is in effect a mutual defense treaty. So what does that mean should North Korea enter a war with, say, South Korea and the US, or vice versa in any war over Taiwan that China is involved in? Does that mean that North Korea comes to China's aid, China goes to North Korea's aid?
Well, theoretically, yes. However, North Korea really doesn't have a power projection capability other than the long-range missiles. So would they use that against Taiwan and be threatened with retaliation?
Against the US?
Or against the US and suffer the retaliation against it? I'm not sure. The North Koreans talk a lot, but when it comes to action, I'm just not sure they will be fully committed into that kind of conflict.
I think one area that they could come into play is if in the Taiwan Strait scenario, if Japan were to get involved, I think North Korea could checkmate Japan's involvement because of their nuclear threat. And so it might put Japan in an awkward situation where they might want to help the US, but North Korea could threaten Japan in some form, whether conventional or unconventionally. And this could create a tension within the Japanese government as to what to do.
Possibly, but Japan and Korea are both under US nuclear umbrella. So North Korea must consider that when they make that kind of threat.
Right, okay. Wen-Ti, Russia, when it made this joint statement with China in 2022, it said that part of it, the statement was saying that it adhered to the One China policy and supported efforts by China to safeguard China's territorial rights or integrity. To you, when you read that in that statement, how far did that reveal what sort of military support Russia would offer China?
I would say that that looks to me like lip service for the most part, because if you were a Chinese nationalist, you could easily argue that Russia, during China's century of humiliation, took roughly 3 million square kilometers of Chinese territory as well. So for Russia to be saying how it's going to be respect territorial integrity of China and to further translate that into some kind of Russian support for Chinese action in defense of territorial integrity or irredentist maneuvers, that to me sounds a little bit far-fetched. And I'll add one more point about China-Russia relations, and that is, to me personally, it never looks as ironclad as it may look on paper. And one example I'll give is the statement from Putin and Xi Jinping around the time of, that was the March 2023, this year, when Xi Jinping visited Moscow. On the day that Xi Jinping visited Moscow, Xi Jinping published an op-ed on Russia's official media. Putin also published an op-ed on People's Daily, that's China's official media. They both said very interesting things. Putin tried to drag China into its own camp. So Putin's op-ed said that China-Russia relationship was better than Cold War-like military alliance. Putin and then Xi Jinping's version says that we are beyond the days of Cold War. We are doing away with bloc mindset. So that's China's way of saying, no, I'm not in the same bed with you, Russia. So if the West is going to give you problems, don't give problem to China as well. Then those are two unilateral statements from both sides, right? Then you have one more joint statement that both sides agreed on, both sides signed onto, when they play very interesting word games. That's when they said, oh, actually what you have is beyond Cold War style military political alliances. So by beyond doesn't mean you are better than, i.e. you are military alliance plus, or you are military alliance minus. Nobody probably knows for sure, but it's the kind of word game that gives both sides very interesting rhetorical tool and potentially additional diplomatic asset they can use.
So a kind of ambiguity there in the in diplomacy.
I'd like to make just one little interesting historical footnote. From 1950 to 1979, Russia and China did have a treaty of friendship, alliance, and mutual assistance. In that treaty, there was Article 1, promise of a collective security, and one of the effects of that treaty was that China could not attack Vietnam until that treaty expired. So there are, when there is an alliance situation, there are some constraints that are created when two countries do have an agreement. So that was with Russia, did you say? Yes,
or with
Russia and China.
Russia and China. From 1950 to 1979, and once the treaty was no longer in effect, then China was able to go into Vietnam, because Vietnam at the time was also supported by Russia.
Right.
And when the treaty ended, it gave them free rein.
Yeah, and of course there was a fallout between China and Russia during the Cold War.
Right.
Wen-Ti, let's talk about the other publicly known Chinese security relationship, which is with the Solomon Islands. You know, this is not like the North Korean treaty. Tell us about it.
Well, so far, I have to say the fine prints have yet to be made completely public. So we are going by the leaked draft that we saw from a few months ago. From what's been leaked so far, it seems like what they have is that China will be going forward. They will be sending the PAP, People's Armed Police, to the Solomon Islands. They'll be providing training support, likely some equipment and other vehicle support for the Solomon Islands police forces as well.
Will they build a military base?
I think that's the part that they're gonna keep everybody guessing. And again, it's just like the China-Russia relations, right? When you sort of flaunt the possibility without quite making it so concrete and undeniable, perhaps that way you get additional deterrence without losing your plausible deniability as well. But then going back to Solomon Islands, I think it's important to note that while it may look like on the surface, it looks like a police-related security deal, not quite a military one.
So a domestic policing issue.
That's what it seems like on public, if you just go by the wording. But note how they are sending China's PAP, People's Armed Police. It sounds like police, but actually is controlled by the Central Military Commission.
Okay.
So you can easily argue it's an arm of the Chinese military as well. So again, room for that's gray area, but gray area one that works in advantage of China. Add one more point, I guess. It's important to note that going forward, both civilian and a lot of paramilitary, let's put it that way, civilian and paramilitary infrastructure in Solomon Islands will be provided by the Chinese side. We're talking about police. We're talking about Huawei building a lot of the 5G and other digital communication infrastructure for Solomon Islands. So this is going to be definitely, if you're looking at from US or Australia, it's going to be a potential risk factor they will wish to find ways to manage.
Tony, Australia was mentioned there. Now, Australia has a bilateral security agreement with the Solomon Islands, but apparently it's not enough for the Solomon Islands to deal with the domestic threat.
Well, I believe China obviously trying to get a foothold in that area, and Australians are offended by that. Obviously, it has traditionally been an area of influence that belongs to Australia. So Australia is fully involved, and I suspect after a while, Solomon Island has to wait. Has to balance its relationship with its closest neighbor and the biggest guy who's far away. So it's yet to be seen, keeping everybody guessing. Solomon Islands are pretty smart. They probably playing both sides. And if I were the prime minister out there, I'd probably do the same thing.
Okay, Guermantes?
Yeah, I would just mention that the leaked draft does mention, it says Solomon Island, according to its own needs, may request Chinese to send police, armed police, military personnel. It does say military personnel, other law enforcement, and armed forces to the Solomon Islands. So there's that possibility in the final draft. It could have included that. And the other thing is there is consequence.
Although, Guermantes, it does say to assist in maintaining social order,
Right.
providing
Internal.
humanitarian assistance, and protecting people's lives and property.
But it does.
It does say the military.
It does say, and also the safety of Chinese personnel and major projects in the Solomon Islands.
Right, absolutely. And it also says that the ships can stop over and can carry out logistical replenishment. So that would seem to point towards a military base, yeah?
But there's a second part of this, and Tony and Wen-Ti mentioned it. Whether or not it's the U.S. or China is going to win eventually in the Solomon Islands. But last year in August, the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Oliver Henry was trying to get refueled there, and it was denied. This year, the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Juniper was trying to also get replenishment in January of this year and was denied. So, and also the president is currently in China. Of the Solomon Islands, and he's just signed 9 deals with the Chinese government. So I think it's not a matter of playing both against each other. I think that he's shifting totally to China. That's my opinion.
That's probably true. He's probably getting his pockets filled right now.
Right, yeah, lined with gold. Okay, American spy services have detected construction at a suspected Chinese military facility in the United Arab Emirates in December, according to the Washington Post. The intelligence report comes a year after the UAE, a longtime US security partner, announced it was halting construction on Khalifa Port because of Washington's concerns. According to papers in the Discord leak, Beijing's efforts in the UAE are part of an ambitious campaign to build a global military network across the Middle East, Asia and Africa. Dubbed by the Chinese Project 141, the leaked material reveals it includes at least 5 overseas bases and 10 logistical support sites to be built by 2030. Guermantes, in your article, Southeast Asian Reactions to a Taiwan Crisis, published in the Jewish Policy Center, you write of China's secret military agreements. Now, are these different? Would you categorize them in a different layer as the Khalifa port that we just mentioned?
Yes, I mean, even the Khalifa port was actually also a secret agreement. It was not published, and then the U.S. government found out about it and warned the UAE that this could influence the U.S. Emirati relationship.
But they're still building.
They're still building, but now more people are aware, and there probably are unwritten constraints passed on to it. One of the things that they were trying to build in the UAE port was a SIGINT site to collect on not only U.S. but perhaps Emirati communication. So that's not a good thing if you're spying on the people that you're working with. But yes, there are secret agreements, and it appears, for example, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Pakistan, even Vanuatu and Timor-Leste also have apparently some secret agreements going on, because again, you can see by the evidence of agreements that don't necessarily talk about security or ship visits, activities of the PLA in that area. We know about the port, for example, in Cambodia that's being built. The part of the port is being sectioned off for the PLA Navy. The Cambodians and the Chinese both say, you know, the whole world is conspiring against them. It's not true. But the satellites say something different.
Right, right. And what is generally, I mean, do we find kind of a template for these kind of secret military agreements, or do they entirely vary depending on the country?
So I think that there are a couple of variations. Obviously, we don't know because they're secret. Okay, so the one that we saw from the Solomon Islands is probably the closest that we'll see of something secret, unless there's another leak out of the U.S. government or something like that. But there seems to be three types of agreements. One is, let's say, above board, and it appears to be innocuous. For example, satellite tracking stations that are throughout South America, Africa, even Pakistan and several other countries, Tajikistan. Many of these countries have satellite tracking stations, but the satellite tracking stations are actually under the PLA's strategic support force because they're responsible for space. So what you have is actually a PLA presence in that country under the veneer of space tracking, but it's also capable of doing SIGINT collection against satellites.
So why would a country, maybe come to Tony, why would a country need to do space tracking, and you know, how is that accepted as being okay? Why is that not understood to be military based?
Well, this space tracking station often is just antennas, and a lot of hosts do not feel threatened by that. And so plus I'm sure they get very good rental rates for Chinese to be in those locations. And China obviously needs those locations, as the United States has the same thing, the space tracking station, downlink stations to control, to basically fly the satellite if necessary.
Okay, all right.
But there's another area too that, I mean, the ports we mentioned, like Myanmar is, again, another secret agreement by the very fact that they're building something there. They have ports and also, again, SIGINT collection sites, not just, this is not satellite tracking, this is pure SIGINT collection. And also in Laos and several other countries. So, and the other part of it is it's grayed by the Belt and Road Initiative. For example, all the ports that are being built, they're all being built to military specifications so that the biggest ships that the PLA Navy has can dock there. Those are some examples.
Oh, okay. And so let's bring Wen-Ti into this. You know, so what is the intent, I guess, behind these secret agreements? Are they, you know, purely to protect China's commercial interests? So we mentioned ports, or are they, you know, empire building?
Wow, in terms of official answer, I guess only Xi Jinping knows. But if I were to venture a guess, I think it's kind of understandable that with growth of Chinese power and presence around the world, they will want to cultivate a greater sphere of interest, if you will. And in order to construct and maintain that, they feel like they will need to also construct, if not bases, then access to foreign bases on which to rotate and to enter, to station their forces, be military, paramilitary, and what have you. So in that sense, I can see how for an emerging superpower, it's a natural direction for them to go down. But at the same time, of course, this superpower is not one that is as in line with the prevailing values of the current liberal international order. So I think a lot more strategic communication needs to happen between China and the rest of the world before the world can be reassured that Chinese expansion in these ways will be in line with the better interests of the world.
But are you only referring to, I guess, the West, the liberal democracies of the West? How about, you know, the countries who also feel that perhaps the US or the West is disrespecting them and, you know, acting in hegemonic ways?
Right. So this, again, if you look at this from, let's say, imagine global South countries' perspective, on the one hand, they'll be thinking about these are bigger players. If they got resources from me that I can extract from, why not? And if there are more than one buyer for my goodwill, for my resources, I will be in a better position to check out my prices. So in a short-term, immediate self-interest sense, perhaps they will think it's a good thing. But in the longer term, if you look at the medium longer term, then again, if you are a smaller player in the world, you don't want the world to be one that acts like a law of the jungle. You don't want might to make right. So in order for the world to provide smaller players with protection in the international political realm, you do need consolidation of rules. You need a rule-based order that will provide you both the tools, the international law, as well as global institutions through which to address your grievances, as well as to rally support from other countries in a similar boat. So in that sense, even if you are a global south country, it still makes sense for you to uphold a rules-based international order.
Okay, Tony, rules-based international order, this is something that everybody should want, right?
That's true. And right now, the worry is if you look at China's bases where they're locating those things, you look at Coco Island where...
Let's take a look, actually. Let's take a look at, we have a map being shown right now. You've sourced from military documents, and this is called the String of Pearls. You want to talk us through it?
So if you look at Myanmar and the Coco Islands, where it locates it's critical because it actually is not far from Malacca Straits, the entries of Malacca Straits. Then you look at the port in Sri Lanka, where they couldn't repay China for building it. Now it belongs to China, and it's in the middle of the transit area of the Indian Ocean. Then you move over a little bit further, you look at UAE. Where UAE controls is the entry and out of Persian Gulf. And of course, China is expecting assistance from Iran so they can control both shores of the entry to the Persian Gulf. And further down, if you look at Djibouti, where Chinese have built a military base right next to, within 10 kilometers of US base, where they can launch UAVs, they have a small runway. And they also got agreement to use Yemen's bases. It controls on both shores the entry to Bab el-Mandeb, which controls the entry into Red Sea. All the commerces and energy from Middle East to Europe go through that place. So they're controlling many choke points. So you can see how it is really a strategic plan that China has in the last 25, 30 years to establish this type of streams. And worse here, if I may talk about Africa, from 2000 to 2020, China has built close to 100 ports in Africa of different sizes. China has also built about 100,000 kilometers of roads, about 10,000 kilometers of railroads, and 15 countries in Africa has their presidential palace or their congressional buildings being built by China. So they can listen in all this discussion. Worse yet, more dangerously, China has been buying up pieces of Africa. Those dictators welcome China's money. So right now, China owns 465,000 square kilometers of land in Africa. That is 7%. That is bigger than the country of Sudan.
Right.
And there's only two other countries in Africa that's bigger than 7%. That's Algeria and the Congo in the middle of Africa. So if you add up all of China's land, they are the third largest country in Africa. And China, once again, was very strategic in buying the land. They get in the area that has strategic minerals.
Right.
So while the world was sleeping, China is controlling a bunch of strategic minerals in Africa. And the fact is, the United States is losing the fight for influence in Africa. And this is something I think the free world really need to pay attention to, because Africa is where many of the things that modern society needs as far as strategic minerals go. So China actually theoretically can actually control a portion of the world commerce if they control this type of minerals.
Jimin.
So what you've just defined, Tony, is the definition of a colonial power. China is becoming a colonial power. They will deny it, but that's the definition, is controlling resources all around the world, controlling ports,
So it's expansionism, it's imperialism.
It's everything they claim that they're not.
Right, right.
But they're above, isn't it? It's including, sort of offering the military support. That's something that they've always criticized the US about, saying this has actually led to the decline of the US, but maybe they're also shifting in this direction. G-Man, you have also written about Namibia. And let's go into, the kind of the roots, the way that China does this, has been doing this quietly. As Tony said, the world has been sleeping, and whilst the world has been sleeping, China has been growing and getting stronger. But tell us about some of the techniques, G-Man. I mean, we all know about the commercial elements, say like building a port, and then this can shift then into a military base. But there's also peacekeeping as also a route.
Yeah, so exactly. The PLA provides more military personnel than any other country in the world to the United Nations. So they are able to go to places that are not necessarily the best places in the world and get to see what it's like. However, their performance has not been that great, by the way. In South Sudan, in the Battle of Jerba, they ran away basically, and civilians were killed. It's not discussed very well, but if you look at a lot of the lessons learned, it calls out China as being basically abandoning their mission.
So this country was, sorry?
South Sudan.
South Sudan, right.
The Battle of Jerba.
Refugee, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and they left the refugees unprotected, and they were many were killed and worse. But getting back to the question of how do they do this, what I view is there are three categories that I've created. Although the classified document that was released by an Air Force guy doesn't talk about these categories specifically, but I determine them as being permanent, as needed, and in development. The permanent ones we already talked about: Djibouti, satellite tracking stations, etc. And then also ports that they're building in Cambodia, Myanmar,
Pakistan.
and military bases such as in Tajikistan, etc. But as needed, these are the ones where they just need to be able to have storage of weapons or food or supplies when their ships come through town. Right now, I think those are what they're looking for in many of these countries that are listed in that release of countries all around the world. So like, for example, logistics support agreement, status of forces agreement, port visits, military exercises, all these kinds of things that are not permanent, just temporary. Solomon Islands would be an example of as needed.
Right.
In other words,
unless they build the military base.
Right, then it would switch to permanent.
Right.
Pakistan has a Skardu Air Base located in Pakistan's occupied Kashmir on disputed land, and so that would be a place, for example, if Pakistan and India went at it, China could, the Chinese Air Force and other forces could go there. But it's not actively being manned by the PLA, but it's available for use. And of course, Iran's Chabahar port and Josh and Kish ports that Tony mentioned earlier on the Iran side, these are also places where the PLA Navy could dock and get replenished. But what's not mentioned oftentimes is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is a bunch of Central Asian, mainly Central Asian countries.
And Iran just joined.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and strange, India is also a member of it, but I'm
exactly.
not sure how that works.
Hosted it recently.
But they do military exercises. There is a security part of it. They share techniques, counterterrorism, all these things that are related to the military. And of course, I guess finally is the embassies. The PRC has embassies, and they have military attachés in 110 diplomatic missions around the world. And these military people work with the other military people and to develop exercises or other or sell weapons to these countries. So that's the three categories.
Right, right. If I could come to Tony for the last question of this section. So my question then, having listened to all that, is how does the US's approach differ? Is China not just doing the same thing that the US is doing?
Well, sort of. United States do not have no limits relationship, right? I mean, China talk about that, but if you look at the no limits with Russia, well, there are limits, right? United States, don't just use words. We use deeds, like helping Taiwan build up defense capability and continue to show support for Japan, Korea, and with the physical presence to ensure their national security is protected. Philippines, same thing. All the treaty partners, we do it with deeds, and I think that's a big difference. And also, if you look at all these so-called friends of China, okay, many of them are fair weather friends where the leader likes China's money, but certainly do not have the same ideology or support for the type of things that China does. Okay, where the other side of the world, United States and Taiwan's friends, where we share common view on democratic values, human rights, freedom, so that when these countries come to protect these common values, it's true support, not lip services, where I expect some of China's friends will just pay lip services and they enjoy taking China's money, but when push comes to shove, will they truly come out in support of China's activities? Well, maybe not.
Our next guest is Edward Wittenstein, Yale University Jackson School of Global Affairs Executive Director of International Security Studies and a lecturer on global affairs. I spoke to him while he was in Taiwan last week about the kinds of nations China targets for its military partnerships. Let's take a look. Ted, why has China only one military alliance across the world?
Your question is an interesting one because it gets to why no new alliances, no formal legal defense agreements have taken place or been an objective of the Chinese government. I think there are two primary reasons. One is that China has long articulated a principle of national self-interest and non-interference in foreign affairs. And part of that leads to not wishing to entangle yourself in the affairs of other nations.
Is that something that you think still exists now, or do you see that any signs of that changing? I'm thinking particularly of the security pact with the Solomon Islands.
Yes, I do think there is a growing willingness on the part of the People's Republic of China to explore greater defense alignments, alignments that with interests as well as ideological values. That China is looking for strategic partners that, like it, oppose Western efforts that it views as containing its economic and military rise and growth. So China does have a number of what it would call partnerships or strategic partnerships with nations, and we can talk about who some of those nations are. I think the most notable ones are Russia, Iran, Pakistan, and Myanmar, Burma. And of course, we mentioned North Korea as the single alliance. But, you know, those are countries that are, with the exception of China and each other, very isolated in the world. Many are under sanction by the United Nations or other Western institutions. They are facing a wide range of legal restrictions related to their activities, often that violate international law or human rights principles. So because of that, China has built a network of those partners who are looking for friends who are isolated in the world, who are desperate for economic or defense-related cooperation.
How does China do this? Does it perhaps start off with commercial activity and then transform into military activity? For example, the United Arab Emirates port.
I think you're right to suggest that economic exchange and dependency is usually the initial stage of relations. And often those economics, though, are targeted and focused in strategic areas. So you mentioned ports, right? So these can be both of economic benefit, right, for free exchange and trade, but also might serve dual purpose in the event that military cooperation were to develop over time. China has a strong need for natural resource access, namely in oil and gas, but also a wide range of other minerals to feed its bustling and growing economy and its 1.4 billion population. Now, you have to remember, though, that the populations of these countries, not just in China, but also in Russia or Iran or Pakistan. These are not necessarily citizens that are naturally inclined or aligned historically or culturally or ideologically, right? But these are government to government relationships. And in these types of more closed systems, those relationships at the personal head of state or military level are easier to obtain. So I think these relationships, though, are fragile. They're not built on people to people support or deep historical ties or cultural affinity. And this is, I think, different than what you see in Western alliances, right? So security relationships such as NATO or the special relationship that has long existed between the United States and the UK.
So if we can compare the agreements, the military agreements that China has, compare them with what the US has, for example, is the North Korea agreement a mutual defense treaty?
It is a mutual defense treaty, and how it was originally agreed upon in 1960. Obviously, the relationship has changed over time, and there are a significant number of challenges in the North Korean regime that I think China would readily acknowledge. But yes, that is still on paper. It is still a partnership. I think the real question is, would China come to the defense or the legally obligated defense of the North Korean regime, which I think is what you're getting at.
I was actually also interested in the other side, which was, in a Taiwan contingency, if China is attacked, would that mean that another nuclear power, North Korea, would come to its aid?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think the first principle here is we should never be in that scenario, right? So you are asking, of course, a hypothetical, as I think you are right to ask whether or not other nations would get involved. You'd have to keep in mind, of course, that were the United States to somehow get drawn into a conflict of this nature, that other nations in the region would all likely be affected and have a wide range of interests. So that wouldn't just include North Korea, it would include South Korea, Japan, Philippines, Australia, right? These are all strong partners of the United States, and hopefully cooler heads would prevail and prevent something like this from ever taking place.
How about Russia, the No Limits partnership? Again, is there a form of mutual defense? I mean, we haven't seen it obviously so far in the Ukraine war. Russia has had joint patrols with China around Japan and more recently very close to Taiwan.
Well, the No Limits partnership is very concerning, and it's not a legally bound treaty defense alliance like you would see in an American context with NATO allies, for example. But having said that, the No Limits partnership does reflect a increasing alignment between the leadership of China and the leadership of Russia, at least prior to the onset of the war in Ukraine. And the question is, will this truly move in the direction of a full alliance over time, or does the Ukraine conflict and its horrific outcome to this point maybe pause the movement from a partnership towards something more formal? And again, what I was saying about the citizens of both countries, as opposed to the leaders of the countries, the citizens of Russia and China actually have a great deal of historic antagonism and resentment in terms of the Cold War, in terms of how China pivoted away from the Soviet Union to sort of create a new set of relations with the United States with the opening of China in the early 1970s. So, there are not a lot of reasons why this could be a truly deeply strategic legal partnership.
That was Edwin Wittenstein of Yale University Jackson School of Global Affairs speaking to me earlier. Guermantes, so we heard there from Edward about the differences that Tony also spoke about between the US and China. The way he described it was, the people-to-people ties are very strong, and he's described the other sort of China's military agreements or partnerships as fragile as a result because it's leader to leader, which is exactly what Tony said. Now, you've written about the proliferation of both US-led sort of hub-to-spoke agreements, but also spoke-to-spoke agreements across Asia, and you've said that that they are proliferating. Let's run through a few of these quickly.
So everyone was aware of the mutual defense treaty that Taiwan had from 1955 to 1980, but that was no longer was not renewed, and then the Taiwan Relations Act. But most people don't know about the National Defense Authorization Act from last year in December, which enabled Taiwan this year to have more robust relationship with the U.S. military, and also the U.S. government is allowing $2 billion worth of loans to Taiwan and a lot more active military engagement, which wasn't happening before. So that's one.
But before you get into more of the detail, let's just give the big picture. So we've talked about China's growing bases and agreements. Is the US activity, the proliferation that you've seen, a result of that, or is it the other way around? Is China reacting to the US?
No, I think the former. The US would not be getting more involved had China not conducted the military exercise last August, or the same military exercise in April this year, or the
following the Nancy Pelosi visit to Taiwan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and all the other activities that China is doing, crossing the midline numerous times, flying UAVs around Taiwan, flying and shipping around not only Taiwan but Japan, and Japan also being nervous about all the missiles flying over it from North Korea. These are all things that are encouraged by China. So therefore, I think these are in response to, and also just the huge amount of money that China is investing in its defense capabilities. This is totally new. If China had just kept a slow, even increase over the years, everybody would be asleep at the wheel. But because of the dramatic increase of weapons and military capabilities that China has, that's a response. Not only from the US, but Japan's doubling its budget. Many countries are concerned about China's rise.
So what you're going to talk us through is basically a result of fears of China's expansionism into the East and South China Seas, as well as Taiwan.
Correct. It has made multiple arrangements with not only enhancing its relationship with the US, which it signed update in 2017, but it also signed reciprocal access agreements with Australia, and also with it's negotiating with the Philippines and also negotiating with the French. These are all things that are not related to the U.S., right? Because Japan realizes that these countries are important to it. The UK and France are the only nuclear powers in Europe that are part of NATO. And so those are two key countries. Australia being part of the alliance with the United States, another key country, and also the Philippines. So in effect, Japan is kind of making its own arrangement in the Pacific, and also with its allies and partners in Europe.
Tony, and is that enabling China to also to criticize Japan, and because one of the things that they like to do is to say that everybody in Asia needs to fear the rise of Japan again?
Actually, everybody in Asia should fear the rise of China, because the peaceful rise Hu Jintao had was the right path. They were slow, they weren't causing much alarm.
But it was hiding and biding.
It was hiding and biding, exactly, based on Deng Xiaoping's vision. Xi Jinping made a mistake, and that mistake continues. And the growth of defense alliances beyond United States, as Jimin just indicated, it's for each country's national security. And if you look at South China Sea, same thing. The threat of Chinese bullying in South China Sea has caused those countries to take up warnings. Of course, in ASEAN, unfortunately, ASEAN hasn't been able to unite as a bloc because they are hardcore Chinese influence in Cambodia, in Myanmar, who basically prevents ASEAN from coming together as a bloc to say China, enough is enough. So that organization is becoming less and less effective because of it. But each country has their own national security interest, and you can see Vietnam and Malaysia and certainly Philippines becomes more hardcore toward China.
Okay. Now, Tony, we've got a map here, and we can see the footprint of both the US and China based on key security agreements. How can we interpret it? Is this the start of a shift of balance of power in the region?
I think there are some shift, but certainly not in terms of replacing United States and its allies and alliances as the stronger power. So is there a shift in some balance of power? There are minor shifts, but not sufficient to say that China has overtaken the United States as a country with the strongest influence and strongest defense alliances in the region.
Yeah, because as we can see from that map, you know, the countries noted in yellow are the US alliances and partnerships, and they do appear to outnumber in the Asian region, the Chinese. I mean, it seems to be a different story when we were looking at your String of Pearls map.
Exactly.
Right.
It's totally different from Africa, where China definitely is in the lead, by far in the lead. But in area around Taiwan, where we worry most, no, United States still has the predominant influence and ability as far as the military and defense-related ability.
China's rise is being constrained now for the first time in the last few years. And China is realizing that it's not going to be as easy as it thought it was going to be. And we talked about the first island chain as being a bulwark for US alliance, but we also need to recognize that there's a second island chain and a third island chain that is also dominated by the US. So there are layers of countries and areas that China has to go through to get free, so to speak, and be able to conduct its unrestricted warfare around the world. And I believe that the agreements that are between countries in the Indo-Pacific, between countries outside of the Indo-Pacific, like the US or European countries, is demonstrating that there's a will to support each other that wasn't there before. And it's because of the mistakes that Xi Jinping has done, because of his maybe egotistical aspects, but I appreciate that because his actions actually help people wake up. So thank you, Xi Jinping.
Okay, we're going to have to wrap it up there. Tony, Guermantes, and Wen-Ti, thank you so much for joining Taiwan Talks.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching our show today. Stay safe and see you next time.